Be examining issues that are taking on new importance and greater urgency as the result of developments in the U.S.-China relationship that have arisen in just the past 24 hours. These developments bring into serious question the assumptions that have guided U.S. government policies and corporate America's international business practices for the past 2 decades. We have entered a new age, an age in which American orthodoxies are being challenged from within and without. And nothing less than our national security and way of life are clearly now under threat. This age is also no less perilous than previous decades. No less is at stake. This evening, there is growing evidence that Communist China is directly responsible for the deaths of 140,000 people all around the world. The Wuhan virus infecting almost 700,000 Americans, killing at least 31,000 more. This pandemic has so far cost 22 million Americans their jobs, and many of the world's economies are near a standstill. A number of government sources say there is a high level of confidence that Communist China is covering up the origins of the Wuhan virus, and they now are comfortable in questioning whether the virus came from a laboratory at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That is a question, of course, that we have raised on this broadcast for the past number of weeks. The sources say the laboratory was working with a coronavirus that was being carried by horseshoe bats from southern China in Yunnan province. It is believed by these same sources that patient 0 worked at the laboratory and somehow carried the disease into the Wuhan population. How or exactly why that occurred, if it did occur, is still unknown and far, far from certain. We're also learning that the Wuhan laboratory was operating far below its biosafety level 4 designation, and sources have confirmed that 2 years ago, officials from the U.S. Embassy in Beijing sent cables back to the State Department in which they warned of those safety issues. President Trump with this reaction.
Well, I don't want to say that, John, but I will tell you more and more we're hearing the story. And we'll see when you say multiple sources. But we are doing a very thorough examination of this horrible situation that happened.
In your many conversations with President Xi, Mr. President, did you ever discuss with him State Department concerns about lax safety protocols that had been reported to the State Department?
I don't want to discuss what I talked to him about the laboratory. I just don't want to discuss it. It's inappropriate right now.
And in response to the report, the Communist Chinese Party today once again used the World Health Organization to shield their culpability. The Chinese said, quote, "The head of the WHO has stated many times that there is no evidence that the new coronavirus originated in the laboratory." End statement. Defense Secretary Mark Esper this morning said China has been lying from the start, and there is no reason to believe anything they say.
I can't speak to intelligence matters, but I find it hard to trust.
None of them thought that they could dismiss entirely the possibility that it was engineered. Nothing is conclusive quite yet. What is conclusive is that for months, China deliberately covered up the severity of the Wuhan virus and unleashed it on an unsuspecting world. Joining us tonight to take all of this up is Dr. Michael Pillsbury. He's director of the Center for Chinese Strategy at the Hudson Institute. He's author of The 100-Year Marathon. Mike, let's start with the Wuhan virus. We have been discussing it on this broadcast, the possibilities for weeks now and weeks. The fact that the administration is certain government sources are at least discussing it now with considerable confidence, as they put it, that did occur, that the origin of the virus was that laboratory. What does that effectively mean in terms of both culpability on the part of China and the fact that they have been lying throughout?
Well, you've been a pioneer in this, Lou, and a lot of your early reporting is proving to be correct. Remember, many people were just simply ruling out or dismissing this possibility at all. Now we have the exclusive Fox News briefing yesterday that intelligence sources show something happened involving escaping of the virus from the laboratory. Now that tells you two things. Number one, It shows even if it was an accident, the cover-up was dangerous and deliberate. So that causes a lack of trust in China, and it calls into question, Lou, all the many cooperative programs we have with China. You mentioned Secretary Esper. We have a large, extensive military exchange program now with China. His Pentagon leads this, and it's been increased in the last couple of years. Our ships want to visit Hong Kong and ask permission all the time. This is called into question. The scientific exchange programs. We have about 100 agreements with China to share science. These are now called into question. The second thing this Fox briefing yesterday teaches us, U.S. intelligence, I'm speculating here now, I haven't seen the actual report. U.S. intelligence must be picking up Chinese officials talking about this escape from the laboratory. If Chinese officials are talking about it, it also means they know and the cover-up was deliberate. That's the problem we now face over the next 5 or 10 years. What kind of government is this in China that covers up a massive catastrophe like this?
And this catastrophe, depending on what actually did happen in the Wuhan laboratory, whether it was purposeful or accidental, it is no less disturbing because of the cover-up, as you say, which is criminal, which is conscious and absolutely intended on the part of the Chinese Communist government. This calls into question everything that this government is doing with China. As you point out, military exchange programs, scientific exchange programs, for crying out loud. China has 4 of the largest banks in the world. They are operating in the United States, as are, I believe it's about 4 or 5 other Chinese banks. They are insinuated into this country in ways that are, it's just inexplicable. This is not the way a sovereign nation operates if it's conscious of its vulnerabilities and its inherent responsibility for national security.
I've been calling for some time, Lou, for an inventory of all these cooperative programs. It goes back to Jimmy Carter. He signed a presidential directive that all U.S. government departments must have a cooperative program with China. In many cases, it's outright assistance. That's why our embassy in Beijing is so big. It's 2,300 officials in our embassy in Beijing and our consulates around China. Lou, that means 50 federal agencies are in the embassy in Beijing with these cooperative programs. Now, if China is not to be trusted, if this is some kind of negligent homicide, for lack of a better phrase, then those programs need to be identified by the Congress and reevaluated for whether they're really they earn our trust for this kind of program. I'm very concerned about our ignorance that, for example, only recently has it been known that our pharmaceutical ingredients, our various kinds of manufactured medicines, that we're up in the 85 to 90% dependence on China. Nobody knew this. These programs have just kind of crept along since the days of Jimmy Carter, and maybe it's time to change.
Well, it is definitely time to change, and there is a more proximate issue, and that is how will this administration, will this country assure an uninterrupted flow of pharmaceuticals, antibiotics into the United States, or its manufacture, better yet, in this country over the course of the next 90 days to 6 months, be absolutely independent of Chinese sourcing on all of that.
Well, and it's a larger issue in the sense the president has promised many times that he wants to level the playing field with China. He wants our companies to get rich in China. Secretary Pompeo actually said that in January. So the idea was this was a partner we can trust to sign a trade agreement to cooperate with us. But I wonder if the president's goal may look a little more difficult to achieve now if we don't have basic honesty from the Chinese side. That's why the trade agreement was so important, I thought, because of its enforcement provisions. Companies have to complain that China is cheating. I suspect some American companies are going to do that. Then we'll get into the enforcement mechanism of how much punishment to give China. In the meantime, there's some new ideas. I hope you heard Rick Scott today, Senator Scott, former Florida governor. He called for a boycott of Chinese products. He said Americans cannot do this. They should just wait only like a day or two and then start buying American products only. Don't buy Chinese products. That, of course, would cripple a lot of American companies like Walmart that seem to have only Chinese products in their stores.
Well, Walmart represents the third or fourth largest export market for China in and of itself. I mean, it's a remarkable conduit for Chinese goods into the world's greatest consumer market, as you point out. But the idea of a boycott and the responsibility and consequences for China in this, we have also another urgent problem. And that is our business establishment, as represented by the Chamber of Commerce, which is calling for the lifting of tariffs. For crying out loud, the Chamber of Commerce aligned as best they can with China, calling for the United States in cooperation with China to reform the World Health Organization. They are bloody, so corrupt politically that they would align themselves with Beijing and the Chinese foreign policy rather than the President of the United States, who is trying to ensure that there is balanced trade between the nations, indeed throughout the world trading system, and to assure that we no longer run 50 years of, after 50 years of consecutive deficits, more trade deficits that cut into our economic growth and prosperity.
Lou, I think we can't underestimate the power of the China lobby in Washington and our business community. I saw today that Huawei, which is still a threat and still a problem, Huawei has hired 2 senior Obama administration officials to lobby for it. It's considered not shameful. It's considered a good thing to get $1 million to lobby for Huawei. So that's only one Chinese company. Other Chinese large companies and the banks have lobbying firms. And we have a lot of people in the academic community who know they can't visit China unless they get a visa, and they got to be careful what they write in their books about China. So we're really deeply embedded, if you will, with a pro-China attitude. That looks like it's going to change now as 100 million Americans sit at home and ponder how this happened. But don't underestimate the power of the China lobby in Washington to block real action.
And one should not the China lobby, to be clear, the China lobby is corporate America. It is Wall Street. It is the Chamber of Commerce. And it is academia, many of whom are in the trough of China, feeding themselves, gorging themselves on Chinese funding. It's outrageous what we have permitted to happen in this country. And again, nothing less than our national security and way of life are at stake. Dr. Michael Pillsbury, always great to have you with us, and we appreciate your insight and expertise so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
President Trump expected to hold a news conference in less than an hour. He is expected to unveil new federal guidelines aimed at opening up America's booming economy. Once again, the unveiling comes as the program designed to aid small business has run out of money, $350 billion. And they've had to stop accepting claims because the radical Dems on Capitol Hill have been blocking those monies. The Small Business Association administration says they processed more than 14 years worth of loans in less than 2 weeks, totaling $350 billion. This afternoon, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tried to bring up a $250 billion extension of the program again. It was blocked by, that's right, the Democrats. Here's the Majority Leader's reaction.
It's absolutely surreal to see Democratic leaders treat support for workers and small businesses as something they need to be goaded into supporting. Americans need Democrats to stop blocking emergency paycheck money and let this job-saving program reopen. I hope our colleagues will come around soon.
His colleagues come around soon. Well, they won't, Senator. I'll guarantee it. The Democrats have become a party of hate, obstruction, and subversion, and there are nothing less than all of that. American adversaries, Russia and Iran, knew all about Christopher Steele's work on his discredited fraudulent dossier in the summer of 2016. The footnotes from the Justice Department's Inspector General report also exposed a source for information that ended up in the Steele dossier voiced, quote, strong support for Hillary Clinton. Now, we knew that, but now we're getting a clear idea of just who those individuals might have been. President Trump says he may use his executive authority to adjourn Congress and the Senate if his political appointees aren't confirmed by the Senate.
The Senate should either fulfill its duty and vote on my nominees, or it should formally adjourn so that I can make recess appointments. The current practice of leaving town while conducting phony pro forma sessions is a dereliction of duty that the American people cannot afford during this crisis. It is a scam what they do.
Well, joining us tonight is former Congressman, former Chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Jason Chaffetz, Fox Business contributor, author of The Deep State. Jason, good to have you with us. What is your reaction to the president's idea of using his powers under the Constitution to send the Senate and the House home because they're not going to do their constitutional duty, that is, advise and consent and support his appointees, which, I mean, we've never seen this in the history of the nation.
The president is spot on. Some of these people have been waiting more than a year for their vote. You have important appointments. John Ratcliffe, for instance, the congressman from Texas, up for the director of national intelligence. He will be confirmed. It's just a matter of time. And it's fundamentally an embarrassment that Congress will sometimes meet literally for less than 10 minutes, gavel in, gavel out, just to keep this in motion. By the way, why is it that nurses and truckers and doctors and healthcare professionals, they all go to work, but Congress is sitting at home with Nancy Pelosi showing late night, hosts about ice cream in the refrigerator, in her freezer? I mean, that's literally what's happening here. And on the Senate side, with Chuck Schumer, they're holding up the Paycheck Protection Program, and they're not confirming the appointees of the president. And the president's exactly right. The way to deal with this is to force them to go into recess and then make those appointments through his power that he can do.
And the idea of it, no president has ever done it in the history of the nation, but no president has ever faced subversion, and that's what it clearly is. From the opposing, supposedly loyal opposition that has become a party of hate and obstruction and subversion.
I agree. I can understand the frustration of the president. The other thing that can happen is Mitch McConnell can call the Senate back into session right now. These senators are sitting at home. There's no reason why they can't get on an airplane, get their butt back to Washington, D.C., and actually do some work. I mean, you have the non-funding. The Small Business Administration has run out of money. They try to be on the floor and debating this issue night and day, 24 hours a day, instead of sitting back and sending out tweets. I've heard enough tweets from senators. I want their butt on the floor of the Senate, arguing and debating this and putting it up for vote after vote after vote. Yet Mitch McConnell thinks it's just fine to go give a nice, soft-spoken speech and say, oh, well, guess we'll have to wait till May 4th. Why should we wait?
Well, I don't think that we should, and I think that the president has made a determination that Mitch McConnell is given to waiting. He's given to understatement and cordiality in the face of an absolute act of subversion on the part of the Democratic Party. Those should not be referred to as his colleagues. There are lots of nouns and adjectives he could have thrown their way, but hardly colleagues in that, as you put it, altogether too temperate voice of his. I just cannot imagine why it's come to this, but it just really doesn't even matter now. This president has a solution, and he needs to move ahead. Otherwise, he is giving in to outright subversion. Well, let's talk about these new developments in which the government appears to very clearly have withdrawn its almost absolute statement of support for the Wuhan bat explanation for the coronavirus, or Wuhan virus as we call it on this broadcast. This is now a clear statement that the United States government has determined that China is responsible for these tens of thousands of deaths and these millions of people who've been infected by this deadly virus.
The evidence is becoming more and more clear. And again, another argument why Congress should actually be in session as opposed to be on recess. There ought to be some direct ramifications for this. I want the investigation and the intelligence operation to continue to unearth the origins of this. Anybody at this point that is trying to point out or push it another direction is just misinforming the public. And shame on all those primarily Democrats, not all, but primarily Democrats, who chastised this president at the beginning of the process from pointing out the origins in China, everything back from the travel ban that he put in place, to the naming of it and how we're going to refer to it, to the intelligence and the understanding now of the origin of it. America better come to grips with the reality about the relationship with China and the vulnerabilities that it creates long term.
And the alignment of the radical Dems with the leader of of communist China rather than the president of the United States, the interest of China rather than the interest of the United States and Americans, who are paying a heavy price right now for what China is responsible for. Whatever happened in Wuhan, it is, it just strikes me. You were talking about we need an investigation. My question is, where in the hell was the CIA? Where in the hell is the NSA? Why don't we know more about what is happening? What are we paying for? We don't know what China's doing. We don't know what Russia's doing. We don't know what Iran is doing. I just wonder who in the world these folks are spying on, surveilling, and analyzing with all those tens of billions of dollars we spend on our vaunted intelligence community.
I would push back on that a little bit, Lou. My guess is that the president does have that intelligence, and he does know. Yeah, I just think that the president, there's a reason why the president put that travel ban into place when nobody else other than Senator Tom Cotton was really talking about it. Mm-hmm. And Tom Cotton didn't get some phone call from Wuhan to tell him what was going on. He was probably reading and seeing other things that probably the rest of the Senate wasn't paying attention to, but the president was paying attention to it. Senator Tom Cotton was paying attention to it. And my guess is that they know a lot more, but they can't say it. It would unearth. I've been out there. I guess I'm real sensitive to this because. Go ahead.
Yeah. You're sensitive to it. So am I. So are millions of Americans. Because frankly, we have seen our government not react as quickly as it should. Our intelligence services have disappointed us time and time again. They've spent more time spying on this president than they have in briefing him. I mean, it is really I think we are at a crisis point as a nation, and we better get over the idea that we've got time for 2-year investigations of what is transparently obvious. When there is culpability and there is political corruption, it needs to be rooted out of our agencies and our departments immediately. And when enemies of this nation act against our interest, we need to respond. And I don't think we need to have a coffee klatch before we do it. Jason Chaffetz, you get the last word.
Fair enough. Fair enough. No, I agree with that part of it. You're right. We don't want to have a 2-year exercise in trying to figure this out. Fortunately, we have Donald Trump as the president who is taking action, and he's taking action very swiftly. I'm just telling you, there are a lot of good men and women who put their lives on the line in those intelligence agencies, and hats off to them. But, only to be subverted sometimes by their own Congress or their own media, the national media, does us no good whatsoever.
Well, if our media can subvert our federal agencies that are responsible for our national security and well-being and all of the good people you're talking about, then we've got an even bigger crisis than I originally thought. Jason, always good to have you with us. We appreciate it. We'd like to hear your thoughts on all of this. Share your comments. Follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. And a programming note, Dr. Mehmet Oz, investigative reporter John Solomon, Pastor Robert Jeffress among our guests here tomorrow evening. Please join us for that and stay with us in Chinese defense firms or offensive firms. We don't know yet, do we? The U.S. Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board has decided to move $50 billion of retirement money into a new global investment index. That in order to earn greater returns on investments in Asian markets. The investment board is reportedly in the final stages of completing that transaction that will happen this month. Joining us tonight is KT McFarland. KT is a former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump. She is also a best-selling author and author of the new book, Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People. KT, great to have you with us. Let's start, if we may, with the most disturbing developments that I've heard in some time. As we're watching the Russians probe U.S. defenses and airspace, and in this case, encountering one of our aircraft in the Mediterranean, the Navy doing absolutely nothing and allowed an Iranian vessel to get within 10 yards of a Coast Guard cutter. I mean, are you kidding me? What in the world is the Pentagon thinking, permitting this kind of nonsense?
Actually, I'm less upset about that than what you said a few minutes ago about China. Look, Iran, Russia, North Korea, they're all going to take advantage of the fact that we're preoccupied with the Wuhan virus. And they're all thinking, well, we're going to get our little bits in now. We're going to taunt the United States. We're going to hope we taunt them into making a mistake. We're the macho guys. We want to show how tough we are. You know, there are things that we can do to shut that down. I am far more concerned, however, with China exploiting our preoccupation with this situation. You know, the Russians, the Iranians, the North Koreans, the biggest problem I think there is mistakes could be made and miscalculations. China is not making any miscalculations or mistakes. That's the danger.
I'd like your thoughts about this, because I'm of a school that believes that you do not get to choose always your enemies and the ones with which you have to deal. We have no less, I mean, there has to be every bit as much energy directed to the protection of our forces anywhere in the world, whether it's in U.S. airspace, whether it's in the Mediterranean or the U.S. Navy, in the Middle East, or it's China, in carrying out what could be a biological attack on the United States. Yeah. We have to be able to respond to all of those. We do not have. I mean, I'm a little surprised to hear you say, because it's almost, and I won't say it quite as harshly as because I don't mean it harshly. It sounds like a previous administration, frankly, to me, that you would, that anyone would permit one of our vessels on a cruise to be endangered by an Iranian vessel that, if it had a bomb aboard, could do at least as much damage as as terrorists did to the USS Cole years ago. I mean, these are fraught times, and we should be, it seems, have a military ready to be up on the balls of their feet, instead of listening to apparently risk-averse leadership in the Pentagon.
Look, the United States has made a really strong statement with taking out Soleimani a few months ago. So the Iranians, they're in disarray, and they know that Trump could just snap right back and do something to them again. The Russians they're in economic distress. Trump has just saved them from economic collapse with the oil negotiations he's had with Russia and the Saudis. I think that they've done this once, let them get away with it. They try to do it one more time, and then you slap them down. But don't take the eye off the ball. To me, it's a matter of priorities. The priority 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is China. Yeah. China is trying to use this moment of weakness, which they perceive and they caused. They're trying to take advantage of it, buy up American companies, trying to control.
So let me ask you this. Let me ask you this.
Like
You think it's a matter of priorities, and I think the priority should be national security. And I think national security means that you secure your own forces wherever they are. And I also think that if you think if the Chinese are a priority, then in national security terms, what is our response? What do we do? Because we just can't sit here and take it, just as we couldn't with that Iranian vessel 10 yards off the bow of a Coast Guard cutter.
Well,
we shouldn't put up with either
South China
one.
Sea is the place to start. We shouldn't put up with any of it, but we particularly need to send a strong message to the Chinese. They think they're getting away with it. They think they're going to come out of this crisis.
What is the message?
They're going to be
what
on
is the
top.
message?
They think in 2 or 3 years. Well, I would make sure that U.S. military and U.S. Navy forces are in the South China Sea, making clear that we are not leaving the South China Sea. We are not leaving the Western Pacific. We should let the Chinese know that we think that they're going to try to purchase
so they can
American
kill,
companies, technology.
If this turns out to be a biological weapon, KT, if this happens to be a conscious and overt act on the part of the Chinese military, and we know that biological warfare is part of their military doctrine, a significant part, just as cyber warfare or any other. If this were to turn out to be that, what should be the response? Because I'm not interested in 2- and 3-year programs, as I said to former Congressman Jason Chaffetz. This country is not operating in the 21st century if we think we've got time to retool, reposition, repurpose. We have to have an answer now.
We don't have time. We don't. I mean, this is not, we'll get around to it. This is like dealing with it right now today. If China has unleashed chemical biological warfare on the world, not only the United States, but on the world, then I think it is the beginning of a new Cold War, which they have started. And the United States needs to stand up to the Chinese economically, politically, diplomatically, militarily, in cyberspace and covert operations. We need to find allies who will stand up with us. And we need to go to the Chinese and say, none of this goes on. If you want a Cold War, we'll match you mano a mano, but we don't want one. But if you're going to push us there, we're going to disengage. We're going to decouple from your economy.
If we don't go to war over the loss of 31,000 now, and certainly more to come, 31,000 American lives, what do we go to war over? When do we quit sending strong letters and talking tough? At what point are there consequences for this kind of behavior? Because whether they did it intentionally or not, we do know this, that virus was unleashed on the world and they lied, and that is the same as making it an intentional and conscious act of warfare, as far as I'm concerned. What are your thoughts?
Look, I don't want to go to war with anybody, but I think economic warfare is where you start, and we immediately start decoupling, particularly our technology sectors, from the Chinese. No more intellectual property theft. I mean, we really bring it down hard on any kind of economic or technology transfer, not someday in the future, but tomorrow.
Well, I think it's interesting that suddenly, our some of our national security officials have decided that maybe the first dismissal of any sort of conscious intent on their part in the Wuhan virus being unleashed has been rethought. That's progress, but by God, it's taken a long time. KT, thank you so much as always. Great to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
KT McFarland. Well, a nurse has made after Christopher Voskopoulos. He's director of ICU at Southern Hills Hospital in Las Vegas. Doctor, great to have you with us. And I have to say, first of all, good for you, and thanks for thinking out of the box and coming up with an original idea that obviously is of great help, great benefit to your patients. How did you come up with it?
Well, here, Lou, I would have to give credit to some of my heroes, actually in some of the hot spots in New York and in New Orleans and in Detroit. Those were actually the individuals who tipped us off that the technique of proning was valuable in our fight against COVID-19. We immediately implemented that into our treatment strategies. And then we've also then after that improvised on it as well.
And the idea of proning, it seems, I've never heard of it before, this crisis, as you say, in hotspots in Vegas, in addition to those hotspots. Why have we never heard of this before?
So proning is something that we have used on occasion in critical care medicine as a rescue treatment. Individuals who cannot breathe and have a breathing tube and have to go on a breathing machine, if they fail what we call conventional mechanical ventilation, our standard treatments for them when they're on the breathing machine, then we do have a bunch of, again, what we call rescue treatments. And proning happens to be one of those treatments. But it's not something that I would say is widely used because not many patients progress to that point. One of the very interesting things about our battle with COVID-19 is that proning appears to work especially well. And we're having amazing results and increased survival rates because of it in the intensive care unit. A matter of fact, it's been so successful in our intensive care units, we've started to innovate and bring it outside of the intensive care unit.
Well, that is great news. And when you say it's with anyone who is challenged or has difficulty breathing, is potentially a patient that this is part of the solution.
So yes. So originally we would use this when someone who is in complete respiratory failure, so they're on a breathing machine, huge success for us, as we are literally not only decreasing the need for intensive care, but we are decreasing the patient loads in our hospital because we're allowed to discharge these COVID-19 patients home earlier.
Right. Doctor, that is terrific. As we're over time, but let me ask you this because it's so controversial. You're so innovative there at Southern Hills. Are you also administering hydroxychloroquine?
Hydroxychloroquine is part of our treatment strategies. In general, what we are following is the treatment guidelines by our national societies. One of them being the Society of Critical Care Medicine and another one, the Infectious Disease Society of America. And that includes a recommendation to try hydroxychloroquine. And many of our patients are receiving that treatment if we deem it is appropriate for them as individual patients.
Have you had positive results or negative or neutral?
That is a difficult question to ask me because since I am on the front lines and I am so invested in my patients surviving, that it is difficult for me not to have the bias that I think that hydroxychloroquine is effective for my patients because I want them to survive. And when that happens, we have such bias in medicine that we really have to let the researchers and the statisticians look at the data.
All right. We appreciate it. Dr. Christopher Voskopoulos, and for all of the innovation that take place at Southern Hills Hospital there in Las Vegas. Thanks for being with us. Up next, RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel. Ooh, she has been annoyed by some people over that Democratic Party. Stay with us. We'll be back with her and much more right after this. Has told colleagues that the House won't come out of recess until May 4th, unless for some reason there should be an emergency. She apparently has missed this pandemic. In a tweet, President Trump said this: "She is totally incompetent and controlled by the radical left, a weak and pathetic puppet. Come back to Washington and do your job." Well, joining us now, Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. Ronna, great to have you with us. Can you imagine the Speaker saying, barring an emergency, she won't be back until the 4th of May? I mean, this is your thoughts.
I think it's disgusting that she's in her mansion in San Francisco while millions and millions of Americans are losing their jobs, wondering if they're going to have a paycheck, wondering if their small business will remain open, and also losing their lives, and she won't come back to Washington and do her job in a time of crisis. I think the American people are being let down by the Democrat Party, not only by that, but them not extending the PPP loans to small businesses so small businesses can stay open and continue to pay their employees. It is really, really a disgrace to see Nancy Pelosi failing the American people at this time.
People who lose their jobs, small businesses that fail, people who are desperate for help here have only to look at Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party for the consequences that they are unfairly going to bear. How does that make any political sense for even the radical Democrats?
It doesn't. And, you know, I talked to someone today, a good friend of mine, and she said, we can't survive this. Our business will not survive this. And Democrats refusing to extend these small business loans. They know how popular this program is. And for her to not come back to Washington and work. The president is there every day. Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, they're there every day, working to help us get through this crisis. And for Nancy Pelosi to stay in her mansion during this time is just so disgusting and disgraceful. And the working class people in this country should recognize the Democrat Party no longer stands for them.
And the president making it very clear that he is considering putting Congress and the Senate into recess. If they're not going to work, what is the point? And if all they're going to do is obstruct his nominees, he needs to move this government forward. That's what the American people elected him to do. What are your thoughts about, for the first time in history, an American president saying to the Senate and the House, you're no longer about loyal opposition, you're about subversion, and you're going home until we need you?
Yeah, I don't think the American people have realized the amount of obstruction this president has faced in putting appointments in place in his administration.
Really?
You know, he was elected, and they have put so many votes to cloture, 6, 7 times what the past 6 presidents have dealt with. I mean, it is truly amazing how many of his nominees have not been able to get through. And I think the president's just fed up. He's saying, I'm done. You're preventing our government from functioning, and we're in a time of crisis. And if you're not going to come back to Washington and do your job, then we don't need you, and I'll get these people in and get this government working on my own.
You know, the American people have watched the Democrats become the party of hate, and to put together for the first time in my knowledge, an investigation of a sitting president, for an investigation of a presidential candidate. 3 years it went on, both by the FBI and the special counsel and the impeachment. My God, the American people, I have to believe, have a pretty good sense of the efforts of the Democrats to overthrow this president and to subvert every policy that he's offered.
Yeah, I just don't know if they know how many of these nominations have gone to a cloture vote. I think with the past 6 presidents, it's gone to cloture about 20 times. In the first 2 years of this president, it went to cloture about 130 times. It is astounding how many of our nominees have not been able to get through to the positions that the president has nominated them for.
He has the support of the party in doing this. Your thoughts as we wrap up?
Listen, I trust the president. We are in a time of crisis. He is a wartime president. And if Nancy Pelosi refuses to come back to Washington to govern, I don't know what choice she's giving him.
All right. Ronna McDaniel, always great to have you with us. We thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thank you.
On Wall Street today, stocks finished higher. The Dow up 33 points, the S&P up 16, the Nasdaq gained 139. Volume on the big board trading moderating a bit to 5.2 billion shares. A reminder to listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. President Trump today at the White House praising truck